Welcome to Profit and Prosper, a podcast that will empower you to become financially independent as an entrepreneur. I'm your host, Sarah Young, an entrepreneur, wealth coach, and mentor to driven, ambitious female business owners who are ready to take action towards having a richer and more impactful life. I'm here to push you to think bigger about what's possible for your business and life, and I believe that your business is the best way to have more time and financial freedom. Just 10 years ago, I was $55,000 in debt and leaving a traumatic marriage as a 20-something. Fast forward to today, I now run a 7-figure agency with a team of 10 and growing and have built over $1 million in net worth while balancing taking care of my health and prioritizing being a wife and mom. In this podcast, I will teach you how to scale your business, take home a 6-figure paycheck, and save and invest for your financial future without having to sacrifice your life today. Welcome back to the podcast. In this week's episode, I want to answer this question. How can we work less and still be successful in business? And what are the things that are preventing us as women business owners from actually being able to work less, from taking more of our time out to take care of our health, to be present with our families, to have fun, to take vacations? So to answer this question, I brought Kelsea Koenreich in to do an interview with me in the podcast. Kelsea is my current business coach slash mentor. And what spurred this episode was about a month or so ago, we actually worked on my schedule. So I reworked my own calendar to pull back to 4 days a week and about 25 hours of scheduled work time, like in face and laptop work time. And I, sent it to her so that she could help, poke holes in it and also just to hold me accountable to actually following through with the schedule that I set. And I said, you know what, this is something that I work with clients on as well in, Scaling Made Simple is my coaching program, where that's one of the first things that I want clients to do is do a time audit so we can, take things out of their schedule. And so I thought, this is just something I see come up all the time as a trouble area. And I know that so many of you listening to this struggle with this concept of how can I actually work less though? Because you feel so tied to your laptops. So in this interview, we are going to dig into some tactical recommendations that you can implement in your own calendar right now. We talked about why stepping away from your laptop can be so hard when it comes down to it at the end of the day. What is it that makes you choose to continue working versus taking time away to go hang out with your kids or to go get your workout in or whatever it is? And we talked about how to build the confidence and self-integrity that you need to trust that you and your business are actually going to be okay if you work less hours. So let's jump into the episode.
I'm so excited to have Kelsea here. Kelsea, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, of course. Always a pleasure.
So before we jump into the topic at hand, can you give us a little intro background on who you are and what you do and how you got to where you are?
Yes. I mean, how long do we have here? Because it's quite a story. I will say that I started, and basically my catalyst for change was rebuilding my life from rock bottom after being arrested 3 times and living 10 years in self-destruction and just having no self-esteem, no self-worth, no self-confidence. And I can proudly say that now I am a mom of 3. I'm married to my very best friend, and I get to work with incredible women like you all over the world and help them in their businesses and their lives to make sure that they're fulfilled and they're fulfilling their purpose and that they are not spending all of their time working and not enjoying the success that they've built.
Yeah, well, I will say I appreciate your background also because it's very different than mine. And I know a lot of your clients are kind of similar in backgrounds to me. And I think for me, you have such a different perspective than a lot of other people have. I think just because of the things that you've done and overcome. And so I think it's nice, you don't come from, the standard corporate-y type background and working the 9 to 5. And so you always I think you question the things that some of us take as fact, which I really always appreciate.
Yeah.
Which is one of the reasons I wanted to have you come on.
I appreciate that feedback. And it's really interesting because, especially as women, like we hold so much shame, and there was a lot of shame around my story and being fearful, especially working with like very high achieving, high powered, like successful, like $1 million, multi-million dollar company women. It's, something that I really chose to like, I believe that we can either look at things and accept them and lead with them, or we can try to hide them, but they're going to come out at some point. And so a really pivotal moment in my journey is when I was working with a certain client who we both know and love. And she actually reflected back to me that one of the reasons why she hired me was because of my history, because she knew that I would never judge her. And so to me, it's just a reminder of like, when we own our stories and ourselves fully, it creates such a openness and connectiveness that wouldn't have been there otherwise. And yeah, it's really cool because most of my clients are like you, right? To where they're educated and they're ambitious and they're so smart, to where sometimes my clients say words and I'm like, I need a dictionary. What is happening? You know? And it's like, but understanding that like, we balance each other so well because, like you said, I'm going to see blind spots and like call them into things that maybe they wouldn't have seen or wouldn't have picked for themselves. And I love the dynamic in my relationships with my clients.
Well, I think it's the point, and this is like not on the topic of what I wanted to talk about, but I'm going to say it anyways. It's just like the point of having like the community of people around you and not surrounding yourself with carbon copies of yourself, because then you just end up in like the echo chamber, right? And everybody's like overworking and the hustle culture and all of that mess, and it just doesn't work, which does actually segue into the topic that I do want to talk about. So, which is time, and how can we all, as business owners and as women, many of whom are moms who listen to the podcast, like how can we use our time better? And I want to talk about the things that we see like coming up that prevents people from working less. Because you and I, we share like 4 clients at this point, which is so funny. Like 4 clients at this point, and we work with people in a different way, but I think sometimes we talk about the same ultimate like end goal, which is right, the financial freedom, but also time freedom, because you need both, right? You need both in your life to feel like fully fulfilled, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And it's like, I think that your financial freedom, your time freedom, and then also like your health, be that mental and physical. I think those 3 things are true success and true freedom. And women are so afraid. It's interesting because ambitious women are not afraid of going after big things, right? And you mentioned like being in echo chambers, and there's a lot of that to where it's like, you can throw a rock and hit a certain community that's going to drive you to do more. But what's less often seen is doing more without the sacrifice of yourself or your well-being or your relationships. I think at this point, it's been so normalized for business owners to sacrifice and to not even look at a different path or a different way, because that's uncomfortable, right? It's uncomfortable to create a new path. It's uncomfortable to start something new. It's uncomfortable to embrace any sort of unknown. And so I think that a lot of times people just fall into what's been known before. You take your 9-to-5 corporate job and then you rebuild that in a different atmosphere that may be your own home office. And you don't have to. And sometimes it's just realizing that you do have a choice.
Tell me about your schedule. What's your schedule like?
I love talking schedules, as you know. So I have a 4-day work week. Monday is what I call my CEO day. So all of my business owners, I recommend that you have at least 1 day a week with no calls, no meetings. A lot of times we get so caught up in sustaining our businesses and doing all the doing in our businesses, especially as we become more busy and more established. There's always something to do. And when we're in the business, we forget about the visionary seat. We forget about the things on the business. We forget about the vision that we had when we started. We forget about the change and the gap we want to fill because we're just trying to do the things that are involved with the day-to-day operations. So Monday is my CEO day. That's my visionary day. That's where is research and future planning and dreaming and just putting things on paper and brainstorming, just like a lot of spaciousness. Tuesday and Wednesday are client focused days. So those are the days when I do all of my calls with clients. I take a limited amount of clients because I am a quality over quantity business. And so my clients are on Tuesday, Wednesdays. Thursdays is my in the business day. So that's where, it's heavy on the implementation work, the things that need to be done that are not so fun, like writing SOPs and like all the stuff that's just like that we usually avoid doing, but is so necessary. So it gives me a space for that. And then Friday I have as an open day. So Friday can be if there's travel or if I'm doing a VIP day, it can be an overlap day, but primarily that's usually a family day. My littlest is 2, so she's still home with us. And so Eric and I and her will go to the park or go to Target or just kind of hang out together. But I most days will just have that open. And I think there's a lot of beauty in having the flexibility of like during her nap time. If I want to work, if there's something that I'm excited about, I give myself the freedom to do that. But I don't tie myself to any sort of work hours on Fridays. And then my hours are tied to my kids' school schedules. So I have 3 kids, they're 7, 5, and 2. And so my 5-year-old and my 7-year-old are in school from 8 to 3. So my work hours are 9 to 3 because that also gives me an hour to get ready in the morning because I think that taking care of yourself is super important. So that's like the high level, that's what it looks like on a weekly basis for me.
Yeah. So that's like 25 hours a week ish, right?
Mm-hmm.
4 days a week. You have 3 kids. You have a full client roster. You do speaking. You do networking. You're marketing. Like you're doing all the things. And the reason I asked is I just want people to see like, hey, look, here's somebody doing it successfully, right? Like it is definitely possible to have that. And the catalyst for me reaching out to you to have the conversation was I just redid my schedule. And we were talking about it a few weeks ago. Like I put it together and then I sent it to you and I was like, poke holes in this. And so we looked at it. And mine is, I think it's about 25 hours a week. I marked Fridays off as open days, which has been fun so far. I'm like 3rd week of January. And so I've had a couple of like open Fridays, which is fun. And so I'll say from my perspective, I've got Young and Co., which is now doing like, 80, 100K plus months. I've got my coaching business also. I've got a kid. I've got a husband. I work out 3, 4 times a week and I manage to do all that in 25 hours. The reason I say that is just because a lot of clients will tell me, I don't see how I can work less, right? I don't know how can I work less? Like I'm working 40 plus hours a week. If I stop working, the money stops coming in. And my answer is it's possible, right? You just have to shift the way that you structure your business and the things that you do. And so that's what I want to talk about is if you have a client come and tell you like, I'm overworked, I'm stressed, I'm burned out, I'm not exercising, I'm not sleeping, I'm working all the time, like I'm not present for my family. And also I don't feel like I can cut anything out of my schedule. What do you tell them?
I feel like my answers to every question are always twofold because like this from your experience, but I am very like, okay, we have to look at the mindset part of this, but we also have to look at the structural part of this. And so it's the same thing here. And so if somebody comes to me and they say that, as my clients do, I'm like, okay, first let's look at the structural piece. Let's look at that piece first because that's tactical. We can put our hands on that. We can see what all are you doing in your business? How many hours are you spending on each thing? Then we can identify, okay, what's not efficient? What are you still holding on to that you don't really need to, that needs to be handed off to team? What are you micromanaging? What is not flowing well? Where are you losing time? We can identify those things. So we'll look at basically the schedule as a whole and like all the things that we want to do, all the things that we need to do. And then we literally just put like, okay, this needs an hour time block. This needs 30 minutes. This needs a 4-hour time block. And we start to put, time limits and blocks around certain things. And then that's all good and well, right? And then you can see it laid out just like you did, right? Like you can see it laid out on a piece of paper or on your computer or Google Sheet or however you do it. And it's beautiful. And you're like, okay, cool. And that, seeing it on paper, makes it real. Seeing it on paper gives you this feeling of this is actually possible. And that's where kind of like the awareness shifts in our mind to where we see, okay, because I've now seen this laid out, I think this could actually work, right? But doing the structural piece feels like a waste of time, as most things that are foundational work usually feel like for business owners. It's not fun, it's not pretty. And so it's like, I want to do the fun, pretty stuff. But that is something that bleeds into everything we do. So we lay out the structure first, and it's like, okay, you're excited by this. You're like, new schedule, I'm going to do this. I got these days off. And then comes like the fear. Then comes the lack of boundaries. Then comes the rubbing up against of like the standards that you want to set. And that's where we have to get into like how you're valuing yourself. You know, we tie so much value and our worth to our to-do lists and how productive we are, that it's like, okay, I've set on my schedule, I'm going to end at 3:00, right? When my kids get out of school. But like, oh, there's still stuff on my to-do list. And what if I just do a little bit more? And it's just like, we start to like have these conversations and like justify with ourselves. And that's where we really have to dig into, you know, holding those boundaries for ourselves. It's one thing to set them with other people, but setting them and holding them for ourselves is like a whole different path. So that's kind of like the phases that we will go through, is like first that structural piece, and then addressing all the fear that comes up when you put the structure in place.
Yeah, I have multiple questions. In terms of the fear thing, I totally used to do that. Like, I would just blow my boundaries at the end of the workday, and it always came back to me, like, to the underlying fear of failure of like, oh, I need to respond to these clients today before I leave, but it's also past time for me to leave. And so what do I choose to do? I choose to respond that day. And then I tell myself, oh, I'll hold up the boundary at the end of the day tomorrow, except every day you keep making the same choice. And so nothing changes, right? So for me, it was definitely like tied up in like fear of failure of, if I don't respond quickly, then all my clients are going to fire me and they're all going to hate me and they're going to spread all the word on everywhere, tell everyone that I'm terrible. And then I'm going to have to go back to my corporate job. Like, that's how I spiral.
Everybody does that.
Everybody has something. Like, you have, maybe that fear is it's something, right? Like, everybody's got one of those things underlying it, right? And so I think it's just like the awareness of when you're in that moment, like the tiny choice of like, do I respond to the email? In this example, do I get this deliverable sent out, or do I leave and hold the trust, the integrity with myself to do what I said I was going to do? Is really like where the rubber meets the road, right?
Those moments are truly, Sarah, just like where they're so defining, like what the choice that you make in that moment. And it's so easy to justify, like you said, those are the conversations that they're having. And it's so easy to just, it's one more email, it's one more deliverable, it's one more response, whatever. It's easy in that moment. But I think that on a bigger scale, whether it's business or life, we have to start making choices with more of a long-term mentality. So in that moment, it feels like the short-term easy answer is just to do the thing. But that ripples into a relationship of the relationship that you have with yourself, and you not keeping promises to yourself, which every time you do that, that's a hit to your self-worth. That's you. Like, if it was somebody outside of you that they kept saying they were going to show up for you or do this thing for you, and they just didn't, eventually you wouldn't trust them anymore. And we have to start thinking about that for ourselves when we're making decisions. And so it's the harder choice in the smaller moment, but it's also the choice that gives you the best long-term result.
Yeah. How do you build integrity with yourself if you constantly don't follow through on the things that you tell yourself you're going to do?
It's a great question. Part of it is just, the simple answer is just you have to do the things that you say you're going to do. And it's easier said than done, right? For most of us, we've held ourselves back. I mean, I spent 10 years drinking, doing drugs, making choices that I knew were not good for me but I did it for 10 years. So you could imagine the number of times that I did not follow through with what I said I was going to do. And there has to be some sort of catalyst for change. There has to be, in order for us to make a different choice, there has to be a reason. There has to be a reason why. If it feels pointless to us, if it feels not heavy enough, then we don't make the choice. But if like every time you go to make that choice of like answering an email, you think about how that is, 10 minutes that you take away from your child, or you have to kind of up the severity and recognize that the choice that you're making in that moment, while it may seem insignificant, is actually rippling into something bigger. And if you can find what that bigger thing is that's rippling into it, then you need some sort of reminder of that, some sort of accountability. Because when we're making change, we have to have accountability. Like when I turned my life around, I literally was in therapy, life coaching. I remember sitting down. I couldn't drive because I had gotten my second DUI. I had no license. So I sat down and I had this paper planner and I'm putting in, okay, here's my work schedule. Okay, here, I know that I need to work out. And so I would put that in my schedule, and then I would have to start making phone calls. Who's going to take me to the gym? There were times I had to ride a bike like multiple miles to the gym. So I think there's just like, my rock bottom is obviously drastically different than most people. I hope that people don't have to get arrested 3 times to change their lives, but it took what it took. And so I think the severity, it has to feel severe to you. Like so many women have lost their marriages, they're living in relationships where they feel like they're roommates, like it's not healthy. So I think the short answer to your question is to build that integrity, to start keeping promises to yourself, to follow through. You need to understand what you're giving up if you don't, and the severity of that.
That's a great point, because I think it is, you're sitting in that moment and you're like weighing the pros and the cons. I'll use myself as the example of like my mind immediately jumped to like, if I don't respond to these emails, then my clients are all going to fire me and my business is going to fail. And obviously my brain, my nervous system is telling me that that is a bigger pain than missing out on the next 20 minutes with my kid. Except we all know that my brain was lying, right? It was like being dramatic. It was over exaggerating. And so I think that's why it's really important to like recognize like what is the deeper reason why you're making the choice that you're making. And then how can we start to shift it so that like that fear that I felt that was like quite extreme, like how can we start to pull that back so I feel more neutral about it? And then the pros and cons aren't so like drastically different, right? Like I'm not as afraid of this happening because I tried it a few times of like not responding to clients the same exact day. And like obviously we try to respond to clients as quickly as we can, but like it was okay, right? Like nobody flipped out on me, nobody fired me. It's all good, and long term, like I don't want to be the type of mom who, Jackson remembers as always in her email or like on her phone or like was always quote unquote so busy, and you have to make that seem like a more immediate need, a more immediate pain point, because otherwise like you keep making the same choices you make and you end up, like you said, at absolute rock bottom, versus you could have like made a different choice all along and then not had that whole experience. But like some people just have to feel the pain, right? Like sometimes you just have to.
Yeah, I think most times, truthfully, and the pain varies on what it is and in what area, but I think most people don't change something because everything's beautiful and perfect. I think that most times change is brought on because there is some sort of dislike or pain. And that spiraling that occurs, one of my favorite activities to tell clients to do, and I probably have told you this at some point, but it's such a simple activity, but it's like it works. When you're spiraling and when you go to that worst case scenario, you literally get a piece of paper, you write that worst case scenario that happened, and then you ask, and then what did I do? Or, and then what? and you just keep writing and asking that same question over and over again. And what you were talking about is like bringing you back to that neutral standpoint. It helps you do that because I call it playing it all the way out. You play it all the way out, you get to the end and you see, okay, I'm still alive. Like there was, no matter what was thrown at me, no matter what the situation was, I figured out a solution for it. And so that can be very calming to just like see that. And we all love a plan, right? Even though it's a false sense of control, we all love a plan. And so seeing that on paper can be super helpful to bring you back to neutral when you're having those thoughts.
Well, and if you find yourself writing the same shit down, like time after time after time, I think you can also just become a little bit more neutral to it, just because you can see so clearly, like, this is how ridiculous my brain is being right now. Like, and I'm trying, not that you are being ridiculous. It's just like your automatic response in your brain is just being excessive, right?
For sure.
And so you can just see it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that, I think all of that, like on the mindset front, is obviously really important. And as with everything, it's all about like the tiny and seemingly insignificant changes over time that eventually compound. But I want to ask you some about like the tactical stuff. You talk about like kind of doing an audit of everything that the business owner is doing, thinking about how much time do I need to do this, and slotting it into a calendar. What are the things that you think business owners spend too much time doing that they need to cut out?
This is a great question. I will preface this with saying it depends on the industry. So like I'm a little different in that I work with women across all industries, but I think that email is a huge one. It's like such a thing that I've never met a business owner that loves email. It's like, I can't wait to email people. It's like the worst. Like we can all just collectively say like it is the worst, right? So email is a huge one. And a lot of it is, that it's the urgency that comes with the email response of like, oh, something came in, so I need to respond right away. I answer my emails once or twice a week. That's not my main form of communication with my clients. And when my clients send me something to review via email, I actually take that and like we'll put it on my schedule, or it'll go in like that implementation day. So it's like there's an actual place for it. So email is a huge one. A lot of my clients are also on way too many calls. And I find that they either have too many meetings and they're having too many meetings because their meetings are not structured well. There's a lot of like just doing just to do because you think it's what you're supposed to do as a leader versus having intentionality in everything that you do. So anything that goes on your schedule should have a clear plan and a clear purpose. So like you can probably cut your meetings in half if you go in with like clear objectives and like the results that you want to see from that meeting. And that can shorten a lot of stuff. So sometimes it's not so much that you take things away. It's a lot of shortening, refining things, making better workflows. What can we automate here? And then there's the delegation aspect. So there's certain things in business, all of us have them that we just like cling on to that we can delegate. And it's hard because a lot of times we think, I can do it quicker. This is my expertise. I can't clone myself, but there's ways in which you can bring, highly skilled people on to do things. You have like the lower hanging fruit stuff, but then you also have that like mid-range stuff to where you have to give people a chance to prove themselves. So I would say emails, meetings are a big one, and different areas based upon the industry where they're just spending too long on things that shouldn't take that long.
I agree on the email. Like email sucks. I mean, no one loves it. I just wish it would go away. I try to like respond back at least about every day, but I'm really only in my email once a day, like looking through. And if the response isn't something urgent, I might give it, another day. Although there is an aspect of like, once I see it, then it's on my mind. And that's something I feel like I need to get better at, is just like getting it off my mind, but also not checking my email before I'm ready to respond. You check your email or your Slack because you're there and it's the habit, just like you check your phone because it's your habit. But then if I see that I have emails and Slacks and I don't respond to them immediately, then it just lingers in my mind. And so, for me, like we hired more people at Young & Co. like in the last few months, and my Slack messages just like drastically increased. And like every time I would check my Slack, I'd have like 5 to 10 different messages to respond to, and it was very overwhelming. And so I've had to get to the point where like I don't have Slack open on my computer anymore. I have it on my phone. I have a work phone, a separate work phone. I put it on I have it on my computer. So if I need to use it, I can, but I check it on my phone, and then I'll put my phone away from me, like when I'm in the deep work block, so that I'm not tempted to open it because of that exact reason. Like, and just the interruptions, I think, makes people really inefficient.
That's a good point. I love that you brought that up because I actually, born from our conversation, I actually wrote a blog about that week about being able to find focus with a lot of distractions. Because that's the thing is like when you're managing a lot of team members, and then, the majority of my clients are also moms. So it's like, that's a whole different world. So that it's like, you're constantly juggling things, and distractions we can't completely prevent them, but I think there's a lot of things, like you said, like keeping email closed, keeping Slack closed, creating that separation, with a work phone and keeping work apps on that phone. There is more that we can do on our end, and we can only control us, right? We can't control how many questions our team members are asking or when those interruptions come in, but we can control like when we respond and how we respond.
Yeah. And that is another habit to build, right? Of just like not just checking it because you're bored, right? Like I see people get into the cycle of, oh, I sit down on the couch, pick up phone, check email, check Instagram, right? Like we have to break those things. Like, do you really want to be in your email right now? And do you really want to? Probably not. On the meetings, tell me if you see this too. Like, how many clients have meetings every single day of the week?
A lot of them.
Every single day of the month. Yeah.
Before we work together, I would say like 90% of my clients. And that's, again, like creating, when I went through my schedule, those clear focus days. I think that's, when we talk about distractions and like intentionality, it's such a game changer to be able to be like, to wake up and and like go into work with like, today I get to like be client facing, or today I get to be, in the work. And that just like, that itself creates more focus. Because like you said, there's mental residue that's left over from everything that we do. And so if we're trying to hop from like, do some sort of like deep work, and then we're hopping into a client call and we try to go back to it, like it's not going to happen.
The crazy thing is, I find that even just one meeting on my calendar in a day, one meeting, right, like an hour or less, totally changes the vibe of the whole like 6-hour workday that I have.
For sure.
And it sounds like it shouldn't, right? It's just 1 hour out of 6, but like I wake up and my whole, like you said, it's different knowing, hey, today is my podcast batch day. It really is my podcast batch day. And so like I came in knowing, okay, my brain is in podcast batch mode, right? Like, and that's my focus. And I was able to really optimize everything for that. And it makes me way more efficient. But if I had a client meeting in the middle of this day, I would be so thrown off my game, and I probably would not get as much done in terms of the podcast. Like, I just always encourage people to try it. And so I recently went down to, I'm just testing this out, but 4 client meeting days per month for Young & Co. And then I've got my like coaching calls that I've condensed onto Mondays. And so I have basically 2 out of the 4 weeks of the month are client facing weeks where I have, more of the coaching calls, and then the Young & Co client meetings. And on the client meeting days, I could have 4 meetings, which is a lot for me because I put so much energy into meetings. But I also basically come in, I know the day before, I know the night before, my day is meetings. I do what I need to do to prep ahead of time, right? Make sure I've got food, make sure I've got water, make sure I sleep well, make sure I have quiet time in the morning, make sure I don't schedule anything in the afternoon so that I can rest, and I optimize that. And then it's done, right? It's over with. And I love it. And so far, I really like it. We got to give it a few more months because I used to do it like every Wednesday, Thursday, right? Why do people hesitate to pull back on meetings so much?
It's all fear based. I think a huge one for my clients specifically, it's that fear of failure. There's so many things that work against us that we have to overcome. Like we're undoing so much of what we've seen and so much of what we've been told success is made up of. And it's like an uphill battle, truly. It just doesn't. And so every time we want to implement something that feels good to us, our first thought to that is, but how is it going to make other people feel? And while I think we need to be conscious of how our actions, ripple into other things, it's something that people will have. I want to do this thing for myself. This would feel good for me. Oh, but then this person might be mad, might be disappointed. If they're disappointed, then I fail, right? Spiral, like cue spiral. And so it's just like, then the spiral wins. So it's like, okay, well, never mind. And so we just continuously put our wants, our desires, our needs, our basic human needs on the back burner because of fear. And the thing about fear is that a lot of people talk about overcoming fear, right? And fear is obviously, we've talked about it multiple times, one of my favorite things to talk about. But the problem with the idea of overcoming fear is a normal human emotion. And so to think that we could remove a human emotion doesn't even make sense. Instead, what we have to do is, like I always say, is see the fear and do it anyways. So like you have to be afraid of how will this be perceived, right? Like what will people think? Like you can have those thoughts, but you also have the power to challenge those thoughts. So you can say, a great example of this is Christmas break, right? So Christmas break with all of my clients, my kids were out of school for like 7 months. It felt like, it was like 2.5 weeks or whatever, but I ended up taking off. I think it ended up being was it 3 full weeks? I think it was 3 full weeks of calls, which is a long time for me because I talk to my clients so frequently. Like I always jokingly say that like the dream is for me to like buy a bunch of acreage and like have all my clients move and like we just live in a community together. It's like, cause I love my clients. So like they feel like my best friends. And so it was so uncomfortable for me, honestly. And I didn't know, teaching what I teach, I didn't know it was going to be that uncomfortable for me, like how badly I wanted to work. And like, I feel privileged that I get excited every day to work. But I think, I had some of those thoughts about like, what if my clients don't feel supported? What if they leave because they don't feel supported? What if, they're having a hard time and it's close to Christmas and they need me? And I think that like, I'm still human. And so I think it's like I could have answered to those fears, or what I did instead was recognize them. And also on the other side of that is that truly, if one of my clients wanted to leave me because I chose to take Christmas break off and be with my family, that's not a client that I want. And of course, none of my
Agreed.
clients said anything, but we have that fear. And it's just like, we have to remember what is important to us. And so much of it is driven by scarcity, which is also related to fear. Like, what are we going to lose if I do this? Yeah. Well, what will you gain is the question.
That's a great question. What will you gain? So, do you have some examples of when women business owners finally like free up the time and spaciousness and have the energy to be able to do other things? Like, what are some of the things that they're able to do?
Oh my gosh. How long do we have here?
Specific examples. Give me a few good ones.
Yeah. So I think a huge one is honestly like getting their health back, mental and physical. I feel like for women and mothers, those are the two easiest paths for you to lose yourself. And so anything for yourself kind of goes to the back burner. And so that means usually any sort of health routine, if there was one established previously, any sort of self-care, those things are like some of the first things that come back, because you're like, wow, I have built in, whether it's like now I'm, starting work later so I can have a morning routine. So I think that's a huge one that I personally is one of my favorite things to see. Obviously, I'm a huge lover of fitness and, was a competitor and all those things, but the confidence that comes with taking care of your body and your wellness is unmatched. And so I think that I love seeing that. So that's a very specific answer, is these women are moving their bodies more. They're taking care of their mental wellness more. They are spending more time with their families. They're actually taking vacations and turning off on those vacations. I think there's two different things, is like actually putting phone away, not bringing laptops. Like that's the kind of vacations that they're taking. And depth in their partnerships is a huge one. So like that roommate kind of feeling that I talked about earlier is really common, right? Because we're on the couch in our email. And so just implementing certain things, like Eric and I do a weekly at home date night, because like I said, I have 3 little kids. My kids go to bed early. So him and I will just sit and talk for 2 hours, no phones, no distractions. And that feels so special to us, and really keeps us anchored in our marriage. And so just rebuilding relationships, starting hobbies or experimenting with hobbies. I've had women that like will try a pole dancing class, or like I have someone who joined CrossFit, like just different things like that. Just a lot more exploration as well. So yeah, just more time for fun, play, presence, and like they're actually enjoying the lives that they've built. It's like, cool, you made all this money, but for what?
Yeah. One of the questions, Brandon and I were having this conversation a few days ago, and he asked this question that I asked when we went on the retreat last May. Who am I if I'm not working? Who am I if I am not like CEO Sarah? And then Brandon, since we bought the other firm, he's been doing a lot of like, sales, networking, all this stuff. And he's asking himself, like, okay, who am I outside of this? Like our goal is to have a certain amount of like investments, cash in the bank, to do all these things. And he's like, well, we're going to be able to do that in like 5 years, right? And like, what am I going to do for the rest of my life? Like, do I just keep working? I don't like the word retirement doesn't necessarily resonate, because I want to be able to do some of the fun things, but who am I? Right? Like, I think that's something that we all need to explore a little bit more and like try to understand that, which is for me, like I come from a corporate background. My values also always been on like school and being smart and being a high achiever and getting the gold stars and the A pluses and like being the best at what I do, and realizing there's more to life than that, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a question that's one of those questions that kind of lives in the back of your mind that you like don't want to look at. We all have like the things that we kind of avoid. The thing about women, and especially business owners, is they are like, you're smart, you're talented, you are like, nobody goes and starts a business. It's just an idiot, honestly. Like that's my belief. Like to be able to take the step into entrepreneurship is a brave one. And we all have those things that we do avoid and don't want to look at. And I think that is one of those things, is like I said, being a mom and running a business. Those are two identities that we just latch onto. And in the process of latching onto those things, we forget that we are a pizza and we have many pieces of the pie. And so we neglect other things. And a lot of that, time is the problem that we think we have. We don't have time to do all the things. And so there's some prioritization that has to happen. But that question is one that more women need to be asking themselves.
It's a hard one to answer, honestly, because it goes back to the identity you've built for yourself. And, for me, thinking about shifting my identity away from the one that I've had my whole life, right, of the high achiever, is scary, because that is how like we go to like therapy for stuff like this, but like that's how I was sort of raised. It's like, okay, Sarah is loved when she is a high achiever. And so if I'm doing things that don't directly like lead to achievement, then, that triggers little, 7-year-old Sarah inside to be afraid of like, well, what if no one loves me anymore? Like if I'm not this.
Mm.
So I think that it's something that we need to explore. And I think it goes back to like that, what we talked about with like having the moment of making the choice of making a change. If you don't have that like bigger picture identity of what you really want to work for, then that makes it hard. And it makes it hard to make a different choice.
It's hard to get clear on what you really want because we think we want things, but it's hard to know if we truly want those things because we haven't experienced them yet.
I agree. So I think all of this is so good. And, we see the same things, right? And clients doing the same things. And ultimately, it is just so important that we like make the changes and have more time and spaciousness in our lives, be able to do the things we want to do and live a more fulfilled life and not just have it be about, the business. As we sort of end the conversation, is there any other like advice or any other like big picture like words of wisdom that you wish that all women business owners could know?
I think that the most important thing that we can know is it's safe to prioritize yourself.
If somebody's listening, they don't feel that it is safe to prioritize themselves. What's like one small thing that somebody can go do to prioritize themselves?
You first want to get really clear on what that looks like to you, not somebody else's definition of it, but what would it look like? Even knowing that you'll be fearful, what would it look like? What would your days or your life or your week or your month, what would it look like? What would it feel like? And just bringing awareness to, again, it's kind of like laying out the calendar, right? You need to see it. You need to see it to kind of open your eyes to what's possible. I think that that's one of the things that I try to do with clients is identify like those areas in which they are holding themselves back or which they could move forward or press forward or, pull back. And so I would say that if it doesn't feel safe to put yourself before your business, you first need to get clear on like what would your life look like if you were doing that. And then you could see, okay, what is one change that I could go in that direction? Does that mean, pulling back and having one day without meetings? Does it look like starting my day later so I could work out in the morning? You said it beautifully earlier where it's like the small changes really do compound. And so instead of overwhelming yourself with, okay, I need to make all these changes, it's more so what is one change that could give me the self-confidence to show me it is safe. Like, oh, look, I started working out in the mornings and my business didn't fail. Okay, this now I feel confident in taking that next step. That would be my advice is like, especially if you are somebody who's really busy and like you have this desire to like pull back from the day-to-day operations, it's like you need to make a small tweak. You need to take, one meeting away. You need to, shorten one thing. You need to hand one thing off, but like just starting and knowing what you want the end result to be, and then picking one step that would head you in that direction.
Yeah, no, I think it is all about the small changes and not overwhelming yourself with trying to do it all at once and trying to be perfect at everything, because that's just a recipe for not succeeding. And I think it goes back to like the building of integrity with yourself too, like to show yourself for me, my lack of integrity was always in health. I always would want to like work out more and eat better, and I would do it for a few days and then fail miserably and then I would never like truly believe that I could do it. So I didn't believe myself. And so then of course, if I don't believe myself, I'm never going to actually do the thing. And so I had to start like so small in this area to build the integrity back. And for me, that was like starting by saying, I'm going to go for a walk twice a week for 10 minutes. And that is it. And like, is that enough to get all of my health back? Absolutely not. But was it enough to like kickstart me and like build the integrity and the confidence so I could slowly snowball into, okay, I now work out 3 days a week with a personal trainer. I try to go to yoga. I go for walks almost every day. I just got a walking pad in my office. Like, I'm killing it now, right? But it took
Yes.
me the time to build up to that. Like, I would never have been able to just go straight into that. So yeah, I think identifying like the one small change and yeah, showing yourself that it's possible is absolutely great advice.
Yeah, and you don't want to
Okay.
like devalue those small changes either, because that's something that you just said that's like really great is like you can look at that and you could be like, okay, what can I give right now? I can give a 10-minute walk. And you could say, okay, well, that doesn't feel like enough, so I just won't do it. That's the like all or nothing mentality that a lot of us play with. Like Kathy, one of our clients, she's like, we're always making small tweaks to take big leaps. And I'm like, that's a great way to put it, is like we want everything to be grand and big, but we don't realize that big things are built with a bunch of small things.
Absolutely. So I appreciate your time. Tell us where we can find you. And if people listen to you and they're like, I want to drink more of the Kelsea Kool-Aid, how can I do that?
Yeah, if you want to find me, just ask Sarah because she has a direct line. But in all seriousness, you can find me on Instagram or LinkedIn under my name. I'm sure that will be in the call notes because I barely can spell it. And then I also put out a weekly video under KelseyKoenreich.com /resources. And those are going to be videos that are going to help you get your time back, build freedom and flexibility, help you delegate, help you be a better leader, all the things, especially for mom business owners. So that can be really helpful for you.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom. And I'm going to see you tomorrow when we go on our retreat.
I know. I'm so excited. I feel like my body is here, but like my brain is in Asheville already.
Yeah. I have to go pack. I haven't packed anything yet. So on that note, y'all, I'm going to sign it off, go back to my other podcast, and I'm going to go pack. And thanks for coming. And I hope that everybody enjoyed listening to this episode. Definitely go give Kelsea a follow, and I'll see you back here next week.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Listening and learning is great, but implementing what you learned is even better. So what's one thing you can do this week to make more money in your business, save for your financial future, and start living your most prosperous life? If you found this episode helpful, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts and share with a friend because it helps me reach more amazing female entrepreneurs like yourself. See you in next week's episode.